Hi, Sunil.
Good evening, everyone. We got like 34 participants at the moment. We'll wait for a couple more minutes before we kick off. All right. By the time other people join in, you guys have got any questions, or you want to put it on the chat or anything? It's the link highlighted in the blue color in the PDF from the Moodle. So you should be able to access it. Okay, it works for him. So some of you have this question of environment holds the container. Okay, so we remember the first week we told you that Java archives is jar, var is a web archive, and EAR is Enterprise Archive. So Enterprise Archive can contain jar, wars, and EARs inside them. So in the first class itself, made it clear that both the web container and the EJB container, they run inside server. All right. So environments hold the container, so it's the server container which holds it. So one more information, I'll clarify this further. As part of current discussion with Guan, who is the chief examiner for this unit. At the moment, we are not sharing the class streaming with the lab exercises. However, I'll try to get it further information if we can share the demos of the weekly lab. I would like to know from you guys whether do you think access to a lab demo is useful for you or not? You can participate in the poll. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
So we try to create some, the lab demo, but it's not a recorded lab demo. Okay, so I have to make it clear. So it's not, actual, the tutor, the tutors doing their lab, and we record it and I'll publish it on the Moodle. So wouldn't record any lab. Okay, so the actual lab, but we may create, some, demo, right? Some demo for you.
All right, Guan, we'll have this discussion later. We'll see what's the best way so that it's not about what we teach, but what the best way students can learn it. We'll have this discussion later. Thank you.
Follow the rules as well. Okay, it's not only we have to follow the rules.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So for the week 2, the lecture slides. Have them open actually. Sure. Okay, this week we'll have introduction to Java server faces. All right, this Java server faces framework is one of the popular MVC framework, and we'll learn about how to build web interfaces with it, understand the purpose of managed beans and how we can work with data in the managed beans in different scopes. That's very important because managed beans are the model in this MVC framework, and we need to understand the purpose of this managed bean. And expression language, you also need to understand the role of expression language. basically expression language is the data binding thing that binds a managed bean to a JSF page. And then we will review the process involved in JSF framework that makes up the life cycle of a deployed web application. All right, I'm just keeping an eye on people in the waiting list. So Gwen, if you could do that, would be nice. Thank you. And we'll also examine how we can apply MVC pattern approach to develop our JSF application. And at the end, we'll have uh, few slides referring to how to validate data in JE7 platform. We'll also have look at some examples, including Ajax. Ajax is asynchronous JavaScript stuff, which is used to dynamically update the web page, a part of the web page, instead of updating the whole page. Oh, good. So from the previous week, any questions?
Sunil, I had a question.
Yes, please.
What is the basic difference between a framework and a library? And will we call Ajax a framework or a library?
Okay, that's at the end of the part. Okay, AX is actually concept. It's not just one technology or something. When we call something as library, basically you can collect your own programs and package it and call it as a library. But if using that library and other libraries, if you are able to achieve a workflow or something, then we call that as a framework.
Okay, thanks.
All right, JSF. So while I discuss today's lecture, I'll be parallelly referring to the pages and notes in the textbook. And I want you guys to use the textbook for your reference. What's the difference between heavyweight and lightweight operation? Basically, what are you referring to, Season Wong? So there's a question in the group chat. What's the difference between heavyweight and lightweight operation? Look, heavyweight is if it is in terms of memory, then I'll call it as having a higher memory footprint. If it is with respect to CPU usage, I would call it as um, having higher CPU footprint. What exactly you mean by your question, Susan Wong? All right, let's kick off. So JSF is the server-side component framework generating the dynamic and interactive web pages. It consists of PDLs, what we call as page descriptor languages, such as JSPs and facelets. They are examples of it. The backing beans or managed beans to implement the business logic. So what is meant here is it's not exactly business logic. It is the model or the one that actually contains what we call as reflection of the elements in a web page. All right. We use EJBs to implement our business logic. I think we need to have a bit of correction here. Okay, I got your question. Um, so season 1 has a question, interesting question that says, what's the difference between heavyweight and lightweight operation? Look, lightweight operations are something which is just involving a few operations like getting a get request or a small pull request. Uh, if it is having complex business logic execution, or it has access to another server, as in case a database server, in that case, we don't put everything inside the manage pane. We offload those heavy lifting tasks of accessing a database, doing all computational logic stuff into an EJB. I hope that answers your question. Okay. So this JSF page generates web page content, which is sent to the client or a browser for displaying and providing an interface to data sent back. This is a brief history of JSF, JSF 1, JSF 2, JSF 2.2. So the current version is JSF 2.3. You can use any of your versions, 2.2 or 2.3. It should be good, not a big deal. So JSF 2.3, if you are using, you'll have a few more extra features released. So there is no big restrictions that you got to use JSF 2.2. You can use JSF 2.3. There are some rich templates available for your programming and development. So we need to update this slide as well. The features in JSF 2.2 and 2.3. Yeah, so 2.2, when it came up in 2013, it has HTML5 friendly markups such as pass-through attributes, elements to make more work with HTML5 content, faces flow. This is a major improvement, enabling management of navigations between the user and a series of link pages. We are not using these features, but if you go to facesconfig.xml, or if you find some content, in outside place like on your Google or anything, you can find how to draw up navigations or the flow between different pages using faces flow. For your quick demo, I'll quickly show you where it is done. It is done here in the faces config. So it's actually done here, navigations. I'm not getting the design view. I'm just getting the source view. Probably if I get the design view, I'll be probably able to drag and drop the pages and say from this page, navigate to that page and things like that. Okay. And the queue control of AX requests. Remember, when the requests are asynchronous, there could be huge lineup for the request, and there needs to be a queue handling thing. And there is a better queue control for the high number of requests, better handling of the high number of requests made in short period of time, and stateless view and security enhancements. So JSP facelets manage pane. Before we start this topic, this is specifically related to the JSF architecture. So Java EE has a different architecture where the model is actually EJBs, which does the heavy lifting, as one of your colleagues has highlighted. So JSP JSP facelets, manage beans. JSP is Java Server Pages, which is something in the history of web development. Initially, it was a Java program, and then as we discussed in previous week, servlet was created to handle HTTP request that sends that has HTML embedded inside Java. But then due to need of more flexibility, JSP was introduced where HTML was the base, and then you have Java embedded into it. Okay. So JavaScript can create dynamic web page, but it runs on a browser or a client. Okay, it cannot interact with business logic and access to external database. However, there are new JavaScript frameworks like Node.js and React that can have backend access as well. We'll have one example of it in week 6 when we'll be able to manipulate with database from our Angular app. After JSP, there is further improvement in the website where instead of JSPs, we have Java server faces, and we just saw the new features that were introduced in JSF. So JSPs are executed and supported middleware such as Glassfish or Apache Tomcat. So middleware is a technology where all your server interfaces, server containers are run. So be it your servlet container or be it your EJB container, they all run inside a web server. All right. So that is the exactly what is middleware. Middleware term can be extended to furthermore things, but we'll stick to this particular definition for this unit. And then here comes the most interesting part in regards to JSF, which is facelets. Just like I said about servlet is the first development of a technology where HTML was embedded into Java. Similarly, JSF has a parent controller. It's called facelet or faces server engine. So every time you create a project, right, you basically dictate in your deployment descriptor web XML which servlet to use. Faces servlet, this is the name and where this name comes from. So it is telling to use this servlet class faces servlet. All right. And this facelet is that web templating system which creates the view handler for JSF. So JSF is what you write as extended HTML language, and that XML page or that extended HTML page is passed by facelets to create that view or the response. We'll go through the life cycle of all these JSF pages in short while, but understand that facelet is that parent engine which creates, which has the web templating system that creates the view for your JSF page. So facelet has support for all JSF UI components, and it helps structure the JSF component tree. So the JSF component tree is actually the view. When I do that, it's basically this specific view, like pick up any page. So it's talking about this view, HTML view. It's probably demonstrated well in the textbook. You see this TR, TD, head, body. So that's that skeletal view. There's the UI components and the component tree. I think there should be an example somewhere in the textbook. I'll probably open up later to demonstrate that. Managed bean. Managed bean is a regular bean registered with JSF. All right. It's a Java bean convention. Why it is called as a bean? Because it's a Java bean convention, and in a Java bean, all properties has to be private, and constructor has no arguments. You can have a constructor with arguments, but for managed bean, constructor has no arguments, and it implements serializable. Works as model for JSF user interface components. So managed bean is the model for the JSF page. So JSF is the view technology in which you write or design all the UI components. And managed bean is the model. When I say model is the one that interacts with the view. And whatever you do it on the view is actually passed on to the model. So when we come across classes like managed bean or a controller, they are all managed beans. So any regular bean class that implements serializable, and it may or may not implement serializable, but if you want to keep it in a scope greater than a request, it's better to implement a serializable, and it should have a annotation called named annotation. I think, yeah, we have it in the next slide. The class should be annotated with named, and you can pass in a value here. Value is something. I think this part needs to be updated as well. It should implement serializable. Serializable is an interface. It's not a class that can be extended. So it is yeah. So it needs to be updated. So a
I have a
named.
doubt actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is the use of serializable over here? Meaning, why do we need it in a managed bean, and why do we need to have this over here so that it is a managed bean?
So need not that every managed bean needs to have implementing serializable. Okay. And why managed beans you need it as serializable? Because if you have a scope of a managed bean greater than a request, you'll probably want some of the properties or the attributes inside that bean to be accessed during the course of your workflow or your application. And if you haven't serialized it, you won't be able to access it from the memory. When I call it as memory, it is basically your web container. Again, for how long a bean is persisted, and so don't get confused by the word serializable. Serializable is actually a term, it's an interface which basically serializes the object in memory into a file or a state which can be deserialized and can be accessed back. Does it answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool.
Sunil, just one thing. So
Yep.
as you said that serializable is to be implemented, and it is not a class. So in the previous slide as well, where we had definition of managed beans, they had implements serializable. So that needs to be changed as well, right?
No, this is correct. It implements serializable. This has to be updated. Look, serializable is an interface, right? You cannot extend an interface. You need to implement an interface. Wait, I'll just show it to you. So if this is a managed bean, so it implements serializable, right? If I say, because serializable is an interface, if I say extends, it will not work because it's not a class that can be extended. Change extends to implements. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. So in managed beans definition, we are also going to like implement this serializable. We're not going to extend it there, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right.
So that's what I was saying. You go and can we make this correction? I think this is there for a very long time. It needs to implement.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Tarun. So this is wrong. It implements serializable. Okay. So using annotations enables us to not worry about configuring instances in faces config XML. It was an old approach, but in new frameworks, they again start to use it for navigation and other stuff. So can never say. All right, a few things we left out from here. Managed beans are accessible from JSF page. JSF automatically looks after managed beans. When it means automatically looks after managed beans, it means it looks after instantiations, the life cycle, and the scope. So it also calls the accessors and mutators method via expression language. So I'll actually show you an example. So this is your week 2 project, and so this is a web page, right? JSF page. When I use an expression language, my expression language is, I'll probably use a clean notepad for the purpose. This is your expression language. Okay, the hash and the curly braces. So what is the purpose of this expression language? It is used to bind the managed bean into the JSF. So JSF, if it needs to have an idea or it needs to talk to a managed bean or an attribute, I need to use it somewhere in my page. And how do I do that? I do it by binding it through an expression language. So this is my managed bean. So if I say expression language and then managed bean, and then I use a dot, I can able to use any attributes inside my bean. Simple as that. So managed bean, the JSF will look after the managed bean instantiation. So when you first use a reference to a managed bean in a JSF page and you request for that page, the web container which initialize the JSF page will also initialize the managed bean. It will also look after the scope. Now, if I go to property application, which is, I can actually click and go from here if possible. Yeah. So this is application scoped. We'll quickly learn about the scopes in the coming slides, but I'll give you an idea. Application scope means until and unless the program is running, the instance of this class will remain in the web container. You remember this picture? Somebody asked. So it will remain in the web container. That instance will be created inside the web container. Okay. Scope can be defined within the class to determine how applications should store the bin. You can use annotations and functions for validations, which we'll explore in the later part of the class. So here comes, this is important. So manage bin can be instantiated in different scope. You can have an application scope, you can have a session scope, you can have a request scope, view scope, flow scope, and other things, dependent scope. For most of your project related work or learning, for your learning, everything is applicable, but for your project related work or most of the stuff, you'll be using these three important scope. If it is an application scope, then the object of the manage bin which got created, it's not just the manage bin, but all beans related with the manage bin also will be available till the end of the application. It has the longest life cycle. And remember, it is synchronized. So it is available to all requests and responses. So if a request is blocking it, then other response will also wait for it. All right. The second one is session, which is session scoped. You can annotate the class @named and session scoped. If it is a session, then you'll, let me see if anything is in session. So this is application scope. So application scope has the longest life cycle. So if anything has, this is request scope, this is request scope. So this is request scope. This is request scope. Okay, if anything is session scope, then you'll probably see a JSession ID being generated for that. And until the session is active, the state is persisted between the client and the request made in that specific session. Once you close the client or you do a session invalidate, that session will be closed and all the session scoped manage bin which are created in the session scope manage bin created will be then garbage collected. And the default scope is the request scope. The beans annotated with request scope will be created when you make a request for the specific page having an manage bean which has an annotation of @request scope. For example, there was something a request scope here like the title. So this title is request scope. That means this specific object of this specific class will be created every time you make a request. And then once the request has been done, it will be invalidated and it will be garbage collected. Sorry, there is no invalidation here. It will be garbage collected. So it stays in the web container for a very brief period of time until that request is being made. Once the request and response has been done, this will be garbage collected. All right. So there are a few more scope, which is view scope. Leaves as long as you are interacting with the JSF view in the client. It is ideal for AX request. And then you have Flash, temporary object designed for short lifespans, can be used programmatically. And then you have flow scoped. It is used for establishing a scope for combination of pages like checkout or something like that. And then the last one is dependent. It is useful when a managed bean is referencing another managed bean. Basically, it does something called a CDI, dependent injection. Basically, another managed bean can be referenced another managed bean using @dependent. If the bean is defined as dependent, it will be instantiated each time it is referenced, so it does not get retained in any scope. So this is probably the least of all life cycles. So this is an example. @named, and this is a bean class. Private attributes, public methods, and it implements serializable. Serializable basically means serializable on a class means the objects of that class can be persisted, or the state of the object in the memory can be persisted. It can be persisted to a file and then can be deserialized when it is required. All right. Expression language. So who can tell me, can you put what do you mean by what does expression language looks like in the chat box? Great, great, great. That's a thank you guys. I think you got it. So what is the first thing inside the expression language? So whenever you use attributes of a managed bean inside an expression language, depending upon whether you are trying to put it in an input field or an output field, the setters or getters will be called. If it's like an input field, then setters will be called to set. If it is an output field, then getters will be called. Thank you guys. We'll learn a bit more about it. So even in JSPs, you use expression language. Expression language was created to perform some markup in a friendly format. All right. The binding between JSF page and a supporting managed bean is done via expression language, which enables output of the values as well as setting of the values into the managed bean property. So this part is the very important part, the crux of the whole discussion between MVC. How does the view part, which is JSF, is communicating with the model part, which is managed bean? How does that happen? That happens through an expression language. All right. So we have certain supported operators which we can use in the expression language, such as dot, which is to access attributes, and then brackets to access some other list of properties. Do we have an example of it? If at all, I'll find it and tell you. And then you can do some arithmetic operations, logical operations, relational operations, and some conditional operations. The basic syntax of expression language I just shared with you a few moments back. So it demonstrates about how to access the password property from a user bean. So in Java, the class starts with capital, but if it has been annotated with @named, you can always access it using small u, okay, the lowercase, and then dot to access the attribute password. So if you want to check username property from a user bin, then if it has a value or not, you can use empty.
I have a question. What is the use of the @name annotation?
@named annotation. You mean this?
Yeah.
Okay. In a few slides back, I told you how to make a bean class managed bean. If you put an annotation @named, look, if you use @managed bean, it will still make it as a managed bean, but it is deprecated. So if you use @named, it's better. And you can even pass a value like in the bracket after @named. If you say value is equals to, if you want to use a different name for the bin, you can even use that. I think we have an example from the thing. So you see here.
Okay, it's called title controller.
Yeah, you can use XYZ also here, okay?
Okay.
And then if you have said as XYZ here, in your page, you should not then use title controller.
Okay, you can use XYZ dot page title.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you don't know how like if it is actually a managed bin or not, you can use an expression language and put a dot to see if it actually prompts you up the properties or not. Okay.
Okay. Understood.
If I would be writing this page, I would not code by typing all that stuff. I'll probably use the editor. All right. So where is that? Title. Okay. So if I haven't even named it, it's still small t ITLECONTROLLER. Does it make sense?
Okay. So I can like if the @named annotation is there, I can just like ignore the first capital letter on the class name.
Yeah, absolutely. You can instead of the capital letter, you can use a small letter.
Okay. So what's the advantage of doing that?
Advantage of doing what?
Putting the @named annotation. Like we could have not put that and like put
No.
that.
@named is essential.
Okay.
Okay.
And then we have to use the small letter, or we can use the capital letter as well.
So this part
In the
is
HTML
not
file.
mandatory. So this part is not mandatory. This part is not mandatory, but this is mandatory. How do I make this as an managed bin? Either using @named or by using @managed bin. Okay. I need to import it. Okay. Don't worry.
Sunil?
Basically, it's like the connection between the HTML file and the Java file.
Exactly.
It's like the
Not the
management.
HTML file, the JSF file.
Yeah, the JSF file.
Right.
Like
Okay.
the JSF that contains the HTML file.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Someone else was having some
Yeah,
question.
can we also say that we use @named while my friend was asking the question? So into that situation where we don't want to reveal the names of our class, we can use @name to write an anonymous name, like for
Yeah.
security reasons.
Yes, you can do that, but not for security reasons. But if you want to do that, you can do that.
So if someone opens this HTML, this page on the web browser, if they click F1, they can see the HTML file. So will they be able to see the managed bean's name?
Yeah, they will be able to see the managed bean name. I
Okay.
think,
In
yeah.
that case, isn't it better to just use
But look, this is what you see here. But when I run it and then I do an like if I run it basically, I'll demonstrate you at the end if I got time. I run it into a Chrome browser and then I see the source. I'll be able to see what's the content of it. Probably JSF will provide its own component ID, 1, 2, 3, view 1, view 2, view 3, likewise. But some of the properties will still be there. So if your question is if I'll be able to see that, I'll have to run it and see if I am able to see. But even if I know what's the management use, it's still not take security away from me. Well, it does expose a few details, but it does not.
Okay, understood.
Cool. So if you don't use @name, it will automatically take class name. Yes, by default class name, but the class name starts with a capital letter. It will start with a small letter. Does that answer your question, Harsa? Cool. Okay. I'm feeling cold. We have covered the managed bean scopes. We are here in the examples. So if you want to check in your JSF page if an attribute is empty or not, you can certainly use this. And if you want to access a key from a map, you can use this. If you want to find out if a number is odd or even, basically conditional stuff, you can use this. Basically, you can make combination of all these supported operators given here. All right, so JSF. So try to understand this picture here. This is your browser, which is trying to access a page, and your page is written in JSF. You're trying to access that through an HTTP request. And then here you have a web container with some more configurations, which actually generates you that view. I'll soon talk about what happens behind the scenes in this part in a different diagram. But try to understand this picture here. This is a very layman picture. Okay, one of your friend has asked a question, what is a map? So map is a data structure in Java, just like set, array list. There is something called as map, which holds a key and a value. Okay. Sorry, in between I had to answer that. Okay, the web server processes the request via JSF lifecycle and generates the view to be sent back. So your JSF page here was actually parsed and view was created. So there is an entire life cycle involved here behind the scenes, because even JSF has managed bean behind them. Okay, so there is some complexity here. But remember, we talked about something called as facelets. So that facelets, that faces servlet, that web templating system will create the response view and send it to you browser. Okay, so we'll take a break and then we'll see what happens here behind the scenes. Okay, it's 6:54, 55. Let's come back by 10 minutes break. 7:05. Okay. Welcome, guys. So where we left it. Okay, let me first check. Okay, this is sharing and recording is going on. Good. Okay, so we left at a point where I was going to tell you the behind the scenes when you make a request to a web page, or basically a JSF page. So this behind the scene stuff, what happens inside the web container. There is an excellent web page that I have found out. Let's say this one. I'll copy that link in the chat. You can also have a look when you are free. So this is the model view controller, and this is what happens behind the scenes. The one part of it is that when a client request come, it is handled by a parent controller, which is the Faces servlet. This Faces servlet, it manages, transfers the request, where this is where JSF is stored, the JSF pages are stored, and it makes a request to the views. From the views, it has its own life cycle, how the views are constructed. First it is restored, then applied the request values, and wherever there is a manage bean, it uses the manage bean. And if there is any kind of database access, there is another layer here in between, which is not part of today's scope. We use EJBs. Manage beans will call EJBs, and the EJBs will call the database. And once they get the values, the EJBs will pass it on back to the manage bean. Manage bean will pass it back to the JSF page. The view will be constructed and it will be transferred back to the parent controller, which will respond back to the server. So Faces servlet is the main controller. In JSF, Java Server Faces MVC architecture, JSF pages are the views, and manage bean, backing bean, or the helper classes are the models. So we'll have a thorough steps. We'll go through the thorough steps, how this view is constructed when a request is made and the response has been done. So this is here. So in between the request and the response, the JSF page goes through this series of steps in its life cycle before the view is constructed and is responded. Okay, the life cycle steps consist of 6 key phases. One is restore view, second is apply request values, third is process validations, fourth is update model values, fifth is invoke application, and sixth is render response. This is a good good candidate for long questions maybe. So try to focus yourself. This is given in much better detail in the textbook. You can also have a look. It is in the page 326 of your textbook PDF. So when a request comes, the first is restore view. So what happens in the restore view? I'm sorry, what happened? I think I pressed something, just give a moment. So what happens is that in the restore view, when a request is first made for a JSF page, the life cycle begins here. The actions performed in this phase is the phase's context. It collects all the information required to process the request. That information would be what are the managed beans used, what is the context, what is the expression language resolver, what are the different dependencies, what are the different requirements. So in this phase, it collects all that information required to construct the page view. So even the JSF page is also parsed and stored. The state is persisted somewhere in the web container. So when the first time a request is made, the life cycle kicks in. So if you're requesting the page for the first time, the JSF establishes a blank view and the life cycle advances to the render response phase. So there are two kinds of request. One is initial request, another is post-back request. If it is a initial request, in that case, there is no instance of the JSF page in the web container. It is clean. The web container is clean. You're making the request for the first time. If it is a post-back request, that means the page, the instance of that page already exists in the web container, and you are submitting back or you're trying to access the page which is already present. So the difference between the two is the first time when you make a request, it is initial request. If the request has been made to a page previously, any further request that you make, it is a post-back request. So the first phase is request phase. Participants, okay. So what happens in the request phase? In the restore view, JSF finds the target view, applies user's input to it. If this is the client's first visit to the page, then JSF creates the view as a UI view root. And what is that view root is? For any XHTML page, let me see quickly. Okay, for any XHTML page, that HTML structure of header, body, table, and all this stuff, which comprises, which renders the HTML body component, forms the view root. I think it's there somewhere. I can find it, but yeah. So after that view root is created, then it applies request values. So during application of the request values, suppose in the page, if you have applied some values to your input text fields, then the UI components which were created in the UI view root will be updated with the state. Okay, this the UI components will be updated, not the backing bean. So if we have a look here in our example, so this is an HTML page. So it has different elements like output text, and then things like that. So everything is output here. So let me go to somewhere where there is input. So here you see an output text and output label. So these are different HTML components. Okay. So once that UI view root is created and the request values are applied to the component, you will be you'll be able to see that this input text field has the manage beans properties been set. At the moment of the apply request values, the number that you have entered in the page is not actually set to the manage pane. From the UI view root, for this specific thing, the UI component is actually H input text. If you want to see what are the different UI components, you can always go back to the palette and click on JSF, HTML. These are all UI components. And the construct of all the components in the tree structure is the UI view root. So in apply request values, the UI components get updated with the state. The values that you have entered will be updated onto the UI component. The next thing that happens is process validations. In process validations, if you have anything that says F convert number or F validate a range, then this kind of validations happen in the process validation step. So all specified validators registered on the component. So this is the component, and this is registered for validation. So all these validators which are registered onto the HTML component are now processed in process validations. So once this processing is valid and successful, the life cycle will go to the update model values phase. In update model value phase, this specific attribute of the manage bean will be set with the value that you have entered. Okay. So this is the most important step. Once all the validations are done, in update model values step, the manage bean attributes are being updated. Yes.
Yeah, the validations are being done from the HTML file. Like it's not being validated by the bean, right?
So internally, JSF creates its own class. So all the pages that you write in JSF will be internally converted to a class. That's something which is beyond the scope of this unit. That's something the designers do, which you don't need to understand. But from a highlighted point of view, when your question is, this specific validations happens on the page, well, it doesn't happen on the browser. This happens on the server side. You remember, this JSF page is in the web container. So this is the web container. Yes. Where there is a faces servlet engine. So the all the JSF lifecycle steps happen in the web container. So these validations, what you do as F validate or something, happens server side.
We're not validating anything from the managed bean here, right? That was my main question. Like, I'm not validating anything from the Java code.
No.
Okay. So I'm only validating in the JSF.
Yes.
Okay.
But it is actually validated internally in a Java code.
Okay.
All right.
Understood. But that Java code is not
it's
like
not accessible to you.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Sunil, but what if we need to have our own certain rules and certain validation?
You can have your own custom validators. You can I think there will be a part where you can write your own custom validators. You can have validators multiple places. You can have, there is actually a few slides at the end that talks about validation. You can have validations in the client side. You can have validations in the server side. In the server side validations, you can have web server validations. You can have EJB validations. You can have hundreds of validations wherever you want. You want to have a custom validator, you can provide the validator class name and then use that validator class name to do it. I think there will be some links in the validation page which I will show you if you want to write your own custom validator.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.
Okay. Let's first go with the flow and complete the life cycle here. Okay. So we are almost at the end of the life cycle where the model bean of the JSF page are set with some values. And if the values cannot be converted to the type specified, so this is an attribute here. Street number will be having an integer or something, and you have passed a string, suppose. Okay. In that case, anyway, if you pass a string, then this validations will fail it. So this will fail in this specific step, process validations. Okay. So it won't come to application of the model values. But if you don't have this, let's say you don't have these validators, in that case, when you update the model values and you pass a string, then it will fail in this phase. Okay. So once the values that are passed is typecasted and it is set to the model attribute successfully, then it will go to the next stage where it will invoke the application.
So basically, one question. So basically, if we pass a string here instead of a number, and then it goes to the managed beans, the model value, and then if we,
Hold on. I said with a clause, if you're passing a string, in that case, you need to remove these two lines if it has to come to this step.
okay,
Okay. If you have these two lines, it does the validations here.
okay, so it won't let it pass if it's not validated
Correct.
at all. Okay.
Yep. I'll tell you, in any step it fails, it will send you an error response.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the page cannot be constructed.
Yeah.
All right. So in invoke application, a business logic can now be performed. That means you can call the manage bean and the related EJBs inside the manage bean to do all kinds of event linking, database access, all kind of logic flows, other stuff, and then you render a response of the view. So in the render response phase, the JSF creates the view. This is the output view with all process information. Okay. So the initial request will have the JSF components in the page added to the component tree for the first time. But if it is a post-bake request, it is already, one state is already there. So it will just recreate it or just deserialize it and put it back to the memory. So in any stage, if you encounter errors during any of the state, then it will be the page, it requires the page to be re-rendered and the response will be an error. So if you see this, in any stage, if there is an error, then you still get a response. The response will be 404 or some kind of exception that happened. If you see that, probably there was a problem in this life cycle. Does it make sense? So this is a very important part to understand JSF. I strongly suggest you guys to understand the construct of the page as a response from the JSF page that you have actually written. Okay, this was an important part for today. Okay. And then some content has been written here, so you can always go back and read the steps here, or look at the textbook reference. All right, this was the MVC. So let's look at what MVC in JE. So what is models? What represents model?
The
The
data set.
Yeah, something that represents the business or something that represents entities or things like that. Those are like models. These are the business aspects of the applications, which is represented in JSF architecture as managed bean, in Java EE architecture as EJBs or even entities. So what are views? This is very easy. Is the interface that helps you interact with the browser, so which is represented by JSF. And what is controller? Look, in your projects, you might be having some set of classes that are named as controllers. Okay, don't get an iota of doubt that this is actually a controller. Controller in an architecture means something else. Controller in an architecture is something which handles all the request response and rules, configurations, and security, and so this is actually done by Faces Servlet, the main core servlet engine. Okay, so then your question will be like, what are these names, controllers and all? Basically, controllers is kind of programming developers they use to identify the page and the navigations. So those managed beans which are involved in navigations and the transfer of page from one to other, those entities are called as controllers here. But by default, they're all manage beans. So you'll find an annotation called @named on them. Okay. We go to the next part. But we can break it down a bit more. Working with JSF, we can write manage bean, which can act as a controllers. So that's something which is written here. Things that I just said right now. So all the manage beans, controllers, they are all your manage beans. Okay. The good thing about this project is that you can find or you can identify yourself. The best practice in making a development project is, one aspect is the manage bean, that is just a direct reflection of the page where you have expression language talking to it. And then you can, for every page that you have the controllers, basically if you look at here, in any page you open it, when I say action something, that means it should be a controller that, or the manage bin that should return me a page. So action is equal to something. If I go here, okay, it does something else, probably not in my respect the best example, but yeah. I'll give you an example sometimes later, maybe in one of the labs, or maybe share with you in next week. So probably you might have seen this navigation controller in your loan managed bean. Okay, so that basically it has an enum data type that serves it back again to the same page. So these controllers is just a way of identifying the page where you have all the navigations set. Then you have data validations. So how many kinds of data you can, how many kinds of validations you can have with data? Can somebody tell me? Or put it in the chat. Okay, data type, validations, good. Let me
Maximum
see
number,
how many kinds comes up here.
number type, not null, and then
Length, okay. Valid email, okay.
for valid email and passwords, we'd have to refer back to the beans, right? We have to validate that with the beans, because for emails and passwords, we'll need certain matching values from the beans, right? Because we cannot validate that from the front end, from the
It depends what you want to validate. If you want to just validate if it has an @ in between, or it has a domain name extension, those things can be done using a JavaScript.
okay.
But if you want to validate if that email is valid in the database or not, that has to be validated in somewhere where you have connection with the database.
Yes.
Okay, so basically we have two kinds of validations. One is server-side validation and another is client-side validation. So client-side validations happens ideally in the browser, okay, or in the page constructs. You should provide the client where you can validate the content before it is sent to the server. Just like using Ajax or any kind of JavaScripting framework. Those are client validations, and some of you actually got it correct with some of your responses. @ not null, those are all bean side validations. So it's a good practice to have your data validated before being persisted into database. All right. So you can use both client-side validations and server-side validations, and you can also use JSF-based validations. Most importantly, you should always enforce server validations, as you cannot trust the client-side validations. Okay. So the best approach is having both server-side and client-side. So why do we validate content? To ensure that data which is stored into the application is in correct format and is accurate. It is very much vital that enterprise data to be validated, because enterprise applications, that has to be consistent. Okay, there cannot be one read that says X as an answer and another read that says Y is an answer. For example, banks cannot just validate transaction value, just numbers. They need to verify that customers have a valid balance. This is a very good example. And then you have if the data is acceptable or not, if it is an invalid, it is incorrect. Sometimes you need to curate some data, but you need to check if it is complete or not. Some unhandled exceptions can be raised somewhere while execution of a program, and such as divide by 0 or array list out of bounds. And those kind of things also you need to handle them. Some can be done in different phases of your program, some in the web page, some in the JSF, some in the EJBs, and some in the database implementation itself. So validation options in JSF, we can take a different approach in validating data received in JSF. There is some built-in validations such as F validate double range, F validate length. The manage bean validations methods or validator interface. So somebody was asking sometimes back, right? If I want to have my own validator, how do I do that? So this will be covered in this. So instead of using F validate double range, if you have a regex validator, you can use a regex validator. Checks whether the local value is against a regular expression. Regular expression is a very beautiful thing. If you are going to industry, you'll use it very frequent because the data nowadays are stored in different systems, and you need to curate the data, and regex helps you in extracting formats and things like that. So if you're doing some kind of ETL operation, extract, transform, and load, regex is very good, very useful there. If you want to validate a length, then you can use a length validator. It checks the length of the component's local value within a certain range. And then you have double range validator, you have required validator. So bean validator is the one where you can register a bean validator for a component. So instead of using the predefined ones, you can use that. I think there is an example from MyCong. Let me allow. Okay, this page has okay, we need to update this page. This page is not valid at the moment. Bean validation classes. So you have regular expressions. So this is done when you have some pattern matching to do. If you're working with variation of patterns, then you can use regular expressions. It is supported by most modern programming languages. There is a, if you use string match function, then it is actually using a regex in Java. So this is an example. Let's have a look. So the pattern, so this is validation, F validate. So the pattern is, if you see the curly braces here at the end, that means it requires 6 to 20 characters of a string in the password. Okay, and the string has to have one digit, one value between small alphabet A to Z, and one value, at least one value with capital alphabet A to Z, and any one of this special symbol at the rate hash dollar or this. Okay, let's look at some more examples. So there are some examples here. So there are some examples. Regular expressions, string literal, these are examples. MyCong is a good site to learn things. I encourage you to follow some popular blog spots and things. I think this page is also removed. All right, let's leave it. So you'll find some helpful information how to use regex. A lot of examples. There are. I use this site, regex 101. for all my regular expression needs. This one, this is very handy if you're trying some regular expressions. Okay, so you just put a string here, and then if you want to find a pattern, say dot represents any character, so it can have any character here. And then if you want to look for a specific pattern, right, let's say somewhere in between hyphen Sunil, hyphen Sunil, and then again hyphen. So you want to extract in some random values what is in between two hyphens. So you can use this, then minus, then to capture a pattern, any characters, and then this, and then any characters. So dot represent any characters, and star represents any number of times repeated. So you can see from here Sunil is captured, from here Panda is captured. So this is a good learning site to learn your regular expressions. Okay, this is validator, custom validator, where you can have your own class to validate a particular UI component. So you need to create your own class which implements validator, and then use faces validator and have this method called validate. You can pass the UI component. You can pass the UI component in and faces servlet into the validator class, and use this class name as validator ID in your JSF page if you want to have some custom validation. And then what you want to write here inside the validate function will probably validate. And there is an example here. You can have a look. And this link is present in your slide, so I don't need to share it. So regular expression characters. So whatever is present under square bracket, it means it will take the values inside that only. So in this case, it will take A, B, or C. If it starts with a caret, that means except A, B, and C. When it says A, B, and C, it actually looks into it basically looks into the ASCII values. So if you have written small a, then it only will reject small a, small b, and small c. Okay. If I want to include in the regular expression in between small a to small a as well as big A, capital A to capital Z, then I have to use something like this. So these are the examples. You can have a look. If you don't understand, you can ask us. Conscious of time, I'll be moving ahead a little faster. There is a questions from Yu Chen Wang, but you already validate it on JSF. What do you mean? What's the meaning of each symbol? Do you mean this specific slide? So question mark here means I need to accept a character, one or many character. It has to be at least one, and it can be many, and has to be a digit. That's what this means. And then you can interpret the rest all based on what I said. Okay. So a /D represents digit. Capital D represent a non-digit. /S represents a white space character, and /S represents anything which is a non-white space. Similarly, /W is a word. So when I was showing you the regex thing, I could have used, instead of saying dot, I could have used slash s here, small s, a white space, sorry, slash w here. So dot represents any character except line terminators. That means if you have something like slash n slash r, which means carriage return. So these are new line characters. Okay, these are line terminators. So dot will match anything except new line slash things like that. So question mark means I need x, the character that you're looking for, ones or not at all. Star means 0 or multiple times. Plus means 1 or more times. N means exactly n times. N comma means at least n times, and at max could be any. N comma m means at least n, but not more than m. So I think based on this information, you'll be able to decipher this pattern. There are a lot of patterns available if you want to see how I can regex or validate using regex. Showing error messages. So we have a special tag, a UI component called hMessage. So message is designated for a component validation failure, and messages is for global. So if you look at your project, so for add page, in the add page, if you have not entered some values which is required as true, that means it will fail during validation, and it will give you the error message with the required message. Okay, this is to make the class as has error, so that you can have some extra style dot error style set which is present under your resources CSS. Okay, but the thing is that if you have hMessage, based on the validations of your UI component, it will display you the required message, validation message. Okay, and if you have, instead of hMessage, if you have hMessages, instead of displaying it next to that UI component, if you put hMessages somewhere at the end, instead of displaying next to the element, it will display all at one place. All right.
So a list of error messages, would that be?
Yes, that would be a list of all our messages. So instead of showing next to the label field saying that please enter this as valid number, it will show down at the page where you'll have all the validations of all the components listed there, instead of showing next to each field.
Okay, and that would happen after submitting form, or just as we leave the blank and we move forward, so a list will be populated?
So it will happen when you're requesting for a new page. That request of a new page can happen when you are trying to submit a form or trying to submit pages, all those kind of things. It will validate and it will show you the errors.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So working with AX is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Basically, you would have seen AX request in between the components of the page, not at the full. The full page is not received from the server. Only the part of the page is received from the server. And only difference is that it doesn't use standard HTTP request. it uses XML HTTP request. AX is not a single technology, it is several technologies, several standards, which uses a DOM object model. So if I have a specific component as an AX, then only that part of the component will be updated. So AX works through an engine via XML HTTP request, JavaScript object. The steps involved is what are the steps involved in AX request is AX makes an XHR request. The XHR attempts to get data from specified address and waits for the result. The server receives the request and sends the data back to the client. So remember, when servers receives the request and sends the data back to the client, it's not the whole page. It is only for the outcome component, which needs to be updated. The client processes the request data and if required, notifies the user in some visual manner. If you see this, so browser, instead of sending a standard HTTP request, it will send an XML HTTP request, and the server will send the XML HTTP response back, and this response will be then updated with the outcome outcome part of the AX and displayed. So you have some extra learning materials. It has forms, different use cases here, forms, loading additional resources, search suggestions. Like basically, if you had have seen a football page where the scores get updated, or a news article where the score of NFL or cricket or football, they get updated instead of the page loading up. It's basically AX there. Okay, then there is something called cross-origin resource sharing. Cross-origin resource sharing means browser implementation, which dictates how AX requests are to be handled to external address. Typically, requests to be made to domain outside the server is forbidden by the web browsers. So if you are in this domain, you're trying to access resource in the same domain, then it is good request. If you're trying to access some other domain, then it is a bad request. Some of the browsers, they don't allow course because usually you'll have some kind of malicious program which is trying to access cross origin. Basically, if they want to do some kind of hacking or things, but yeah, that's why don't click on scripts in unknown pages. And that kind of behavior is controlled by this course policy. Okay. Then we have Ajax and Java server faces. This framework is about JavaScript to process the request. Somebody in the initial step of the class asked whether if it's a library or a framework. It's a framework. You have the answer here. So it provides more flexibility in working with application values rather than jQuery library. So jQuery library has been further improved. You have further, first you have JavaScript, then you have jQueries, then you have different scripting frameworks available. So sending a request involves attributes defined in the Ajax element, and then you have an event which triggers it. It can be a timer, it can be a click, it can be a mouse over. And then there is a component which should be executed with AX request. And then request is sent in the life cycle. There is one part which is a listener, which is listened to, which is executed in response to a request made by the client. So if a request has been made by an AX executor, then listener is the one which is listening to it. And then there is part which is the outcome. The renderer is the component that needs to be updated after AX processes. So So when there is there is a command button inside a form. So when you click on the button, it executes name, text value, and the related value what you type in here will be outputted in here without the page being loaded completely. So this is the renderer. This is the listener. Okay, actually we have a small project, probably put it in Moodle or something, where you can run this program and see how the AX works. And then these are some set of useful libraries. So this is very standard to all kind of scripting framework where you pass the dollar and required dependencies while processing a request. So you just have a look at it. It's not much important. There are other ways of using AX in JSF. These are rich faces, omni faces, ice faces, prima faces. If you see the palette section of your stuff, you have those components already ready-made for you. You just have to drag, drop, and use it. This will make your web pages so cool, and it will also make your web pages look very, very nice. However, we don't encourage people to use it, but if you want to use it, you are always free to use it. All right. So that's a summary of our today's class. The important part was to understand JSF framework, where it lives in its architecture. It is inside a web container. And the purpose of managed beans with respect to the JSF pages. Basically, if JSF page is the face, then managed bean is the one which backs it, is the backing bean of that JSF page, and how they are binded through expression language. And then we have gone through the process involved in JSF lifecycle. And then we understood how we can apply MVC pattern to develop JSF applications. And then we also saw how to validate data and some examples of AX. So next week we'll start learning about the main component which implements the business logic, or which does all the heavy lifting, which is enterprise Java beans, EJBs. Okay, if you have any questions, you can shoot, or we stop here. Any question, guys? I definitely recommend, please go through the textbook. Textbook has lot of information which may not be present in the slides. And try to learn something from the textbook. It will be definitely very useful. Okay, guys, thank you. Thank you for joining to this class. Have a good evening.